The kingdom of Mbada did not fall because its warriors were weak. They were not weak. The men of Mbada were trained from the age of 7 in the Sorokan fighting tradition, a discipline that combined striking and the reading of an opponent's body weight before a movement was completed. A Mbada warrior in full form could disarm 3 men in the time it took 1 man to draw a sword. Their women watched the borders in times of peace and sharpened blades in times of war. Their children knew the names of every valley and forest path within 3 days' march in every direction. Mbada fell because the Kosara Empire did not come to fight it. It came to remove it from the earth. The Kosara army arrived at the border of Mbada 3 days after the dry season's first harmattan, when the wind carried dust that was very thick. 3,000 soldiers moved through that dust without a drum, without a horn, without fire. When the border watchers heard them, the army was already past the first line of defense, already inside the kingdom's center. By morning, the capital was burning. The king of Mbada, a man named Diado, died on his own throne with 4 spears in his chest, holding a sword he had not had time to swing. His council was slaughtered in the council house, and his eldest sons were killed in the outer compound. His warriors, awoken from sleep, fought in the streets without armor and were defeated by men who had eaten well and rested fully before marching. The Kosara did not take slaves that night. They took no animals, no food, no money. They burned everything. The store kept for money was emptied before the building was set ablaze. The stores for grain were set alight. The animals were driven off cliffs into the river. This was not a raid. It was not conquest. It was an elimination. By midday, 3,000 villagers were dead or scattered into the bush, running in every direction without plan or purpose, surviving only because the Kosara did not chase common people. They had come for something specific. When they did not find it, their commander, a general named Koruma, ordered his soldiers to return north. They left Mbada empty, not ruined. Empty, a city of ash and silence, swept clean of everything that had made it a kingdom. Among those who fled into the bush was a boy of 16 named Gosu. He was the youngest son of a man who had trained the king's guard for 20 years and who died in the outer courtyard with a spear in one hand and a knife in the other, taking 4 Kosara soldiers with him before the 5th one found his neck. Gosu had been awake when the attack began because he was a poor sleeper, always had been, and he ran before his father fell, which was something he carried in his chest like a stone for every year that followed. He ran alone. He ran until the smell of smoke was behind him and the screaming had stopped. Then he stopped and understood that he had nothing. No family, no kingdom, no weapon, and certainly no name that meant anything anymore, because Mbada was gone, and the only people who knew what Mbada meant were dead or running. He was captured 3 days later by Kosara soldiers sweeping the bush for survivors. They did not kill him. They put him in chains and walked him for 11 days until they reached a town called Fassa, where captured enemies were sorted by usefulness. Gosu was 16, lean too. He was assigned to the fighting pits. The Kosara Empire maintained pits for fighting in 7 towns. They served multiple purposes. They entertained soldiers stationed far from home. They broke the spirit of captured fighters who might organize rebellion, and they disposed of enemies the empire could not execute publicly, which were men whose deaths needed to be gradual and enjoyable rather than quick. The pits of Fassa were dug into red clay ground, 8 meters deep, 10 meters across. Fighters lived in cells dug into the pit walls, coming out only to fight or to perform labor in the yard. Most men lasted 3 seasons. The best lasted 2 years. No one had ever lasted longer. Gosu was thrown into his first fight 6 days after arriving. His opponent was a man twice his age and had 3 times his experience, a captured warrior called Zindaka, who had been in the pits for 14 months and who had developed a reputation for killing, as if he had made peace with the business of ending lives and saw no reason to extend suffering. Zindaka came at Gosu with a short iron blade and the confidence of a man who had enough practice. The first cut opened Gosu's left arm from elbow to wrist. The second cut was at his rib, and the third cut was aimed at his throat, and the blade turned. Not because Gosu moved. The iron edge reached his skin and bent sideways, as if it had struck something strong. Zindaka pulled back and stared at the blade in his hand. Gosu looked at his throat, expecting blood. There was none. He looked at his arm. The wound was there, real, already closing. He looked at his ribs. The cut was shallow and fading. Zindaka drove the blade again. It bent again. He switched to a spear and struck. The iron tip crumpled against Gosu's chest like cloth pressed against stone. Zindaka set down his weapons, sat on the red clay floor, and waited. He had spent 14 months killing men who were trying to survive. He had no interest in exhausting himself against something that could not die. The soldiers did not understand what they had witnessed. They shouted demands and sent guards down with whips when no man moved. Zindaka was flogged, and Gosu was flogged too. Gosu discovered that whips caught him perfectly, that pain still reached him, that suffering was still his, that the gift protected him only from weapons meant to kill. He was not invincible. He simply could not die. The difference between the two took time to understand. Word spread through Fassa, the way all impossible things spread. It spread slowly at first, then all at once. Within a month, the commander had sent a report to the capital. Within 3 months, a representative of the Kosara war tribe arrived to observe. Within 6 months, Gosu had survived 31 pit fights against increasingly experienced opponents, using mighty and different weapons: iron blades, bronze spears, weighted clubs with iron studs, arrows fired from close range, from distance, from ambush. Every metal weapon bent, crumpled, or snapped on contact with his skin. Stone and bone could cut him, wood could bruise him. The pit fighters learned this quickly and fought him with wooden clubs and sharpened bone, which hurt him badly but could not finish him. Several fights left him barely conscious, his body a landscape of bruises and cracked bone. He spent nights in his cell, unable to move, recovering slowly, but always by morning, he could stand again. The recovery was part of the gift. What could not kill him healed faster than it should. Gosu stopped thinking about escape in those early months. Escape needed energy, allies, and opportunity, and in the pits, he had none of these. He had only fights, recovery, and the slow accumulation of knowledge that came from facing men who were trying to hurt him badly enough to end his usefulness. He learned from every opponent. This was not the gift, it was attention. His father had trained him to watch, to read, to absorb an opponent's style, the way one absorbed the rhythm of a conversation. In the pits, he had nothing else to do. He studied Zindaka's style. He studied the mountain fighters and their high guard, shoulder charges. He studied the river people who fought like water, flowing around rather than meeting it. He took note of everything, and because he could not die, because every fight was education rather than risk, he could afford to absorb blows that other men would dodge, learning what they felt like, learning how bodies distributed weight when they threw them. By the end of his first year, Gosu was the most technically educated fighter in Fassa. By the end of his second, he was the most dangerous man in 5 garrison towns. General Kuruma arrived at Fassa in the 3rd year of Gosu's captivity. He was the same general who had commanded the destruction of Mbada. A man of 50, scarred across one side of his face from a northern desert campaign, carrying himself with the particular posture of a man who had never lost and who had organized his entire life to ensure he never would. Koroma observed 3 of Gosu's fights from above without speaking. He watched with focus. Then he descended into the pit alone. Gosu recognized him. He had been 16 years old the last time he saw that face, lit by the fire of his burning city. Some faces do not leave the memory, regardless of how many years pass. Koroma did not come to fight. He came to offer a position, a place in the Kosara army, as a man who would lead charges against fortified positions, absorbing what could not be absorbed, breaking what could not be broken, surviving what killed everyone around him. In exchange, he would get freedom from the pits, status, purpose. Gosu listened to the full offer. Then he told the general, in the calmest voice he had used since Mbada burned, that he would die before he fought for the men who emptied his kingdom. Koroma nodded as if he had expected this. He climbed back out of the pit. The next morning, Gosu's cell was smaller, his food was lesser, and his fights more frequent, chosen for cruelty rather than skill, men who enjoyed suffering rather than ending it. Gosu endured like he had been enduring since he was 16. He was 20 now and understood something Koroma did not. A man who cannot be killed does not need to hurry. He has time, and he can wait with a patience that frightens people who operate on human timelines. He waited, watched, and he planned. The plan required one thing, which was a weapon that was not iron or bronze. Gosu spent 4 months building a friendship with the pit's water carrier, an old man named Sibiri, who was too old for field labor and too valuable to discard, who moved freely between cells and the yard, and who talked constantly in the way of very old men for whom loneliness had become unbearable. Gosu listened. Sibiri talked. What Gosu learned over 4 months of listening was that the soldiers were rotated on the last day of each moon cycle. The new rotation arrived from the north while the old rotation went south, and for approximately 2 hours, the garrison operated with double population and half attention. Soldiers distracted by greetings, handoffs, and the organized chaos of institutional change. He also learned that the pit's eastern wall had sand running through the clay, soft ground the builders had known about for years and never properly reinforced, because the pit was 3 meters deeper than the original design, and the engineers who built it were long dead. On the last day of the moon cycle, Gosu dug. He used his hands and a sharpened bone from a previous fight. He worked during the hours when it was the loudest, when new soldiers were celebrating arrival and old soldiers celebrating departure, when no one below was being listened for. It took 4 hours to create a gap wide enough for his body. He pushed through into an abandoned access tunnel. He followed it until it opened into a drainage channel outside the wall. He came up out of the earth in the dark, covered in red clay, and ran. He ran for 2 days without stopping to sleep. There is a kind of person that survives the destruction of their world by becoming something harder than what destroyed them. The southern territories below the Kosara expansion line were full of such people. Survivors of 14 kingdoms the empire had consumed in 40 years of growth. Men and women who had been warriors, farmers, traders, administrators, priests, and who were now simply displaced, living in bush camps and river settlements, keeping to themselves. Gosu found the first group 6 days after escaping Fassa. 11 people at a camp, 4 former warriors from the kingdom of Nduba, a woman who had been a builder and constructor for the kingdom of Seba, 2 brothers who had been river merchants before the Kosara, took their boats and routes, and 4 others too young or too damaged to define themselves by what they had been. Gosu did not arrive with his speech. He arrived hungry, exhausted, and honest. He told them what he was, what he could do, and what he intended. He was going north. He would dismantle Kosara district by district if necessary. He had no army, no plan more detailed than moving forward, and no promise except that he would not stop until he was dead, or the empire was not. He invited anyone willing to come. 7 of the 11 joined him. Over the following months, the number grew. They moved through the southern territory slowly, absorbing every broken camp, every dispersed band, every surviving fighter who had been waiting for a direction to aim at. By the time Gosu turned north toward the first Kosara district below Fassa, he had 212 people. Not all of them were fighters. Some of them were builders, others were healers. Some were people who knew the roads, the water sources, the supply routes the Kosara depended on. The builder from Seba, a woman named Fatuke, became the most important person in the alliance. She had spent 20 years building walls and, more critically, knowing how to bring them down. She understood Kosara construction because the empire had hired builders from conquered territories to build its garrisons, and those builders had spoken to each other, and Fatuke had listened to all of them. She knew where every district was vulnerable. The first district fell in a single night, not through assault, but through water. Fatuke redirected a seasonal river using dog channels and dams, flooding the district's lower level where weapons were stored and horses stabled. In the chaos, Gosu and 40 fighters went over the wall at the one point where the guard rotation had been disrupted by flooding. He moved through the district like something that should not exist in the physical world. Soldiers threw everything at him. Iron spears shattered against his chest. Blades snapped on his arms. Arrows bounced from his back. He did not stop and did not slow. He reached the district commander and brought the man down with his bare hands, the only weapon that could never be taken from him. 37 Kosara soldiers died that night. The rest fled. The district's food stores, horses, and records were taken. The records were more valuable than everything else. Fatuke spent 3 days studying them and got knowledge on supply routes, district strengths, patrol schedules, and a map of every imperial holding between their position and the capital. Gosu's gathering had just become an army. What followed was 18 months of the most effective campaign the Kosara Empire had ever faced. It worked because Gosu did not fight like an empire. He did not march armies against armies on open ground, where Kosara numbers and weapons would crush him. He fought in the dark, in the rain, even in the hours before dawn, when men's attention was very thin. He hit supply lines rather than fortifications. He burned grain stores, collapsed wells, blocked mountain passes with landslides that Fatuke engineered very well. When the Kosara sent forces to chase him, he let them run, while his secondary groups hit the district the pursuing force had just left. The empire was trying to hold the line against water, and Gosu was the water, but he was also a symbol. Word of the man who could not be killed spread through Kosara territories faster than any messenger. The empire tried to suppress the stories. Governors issued statements calling him a fraud, a madman. They sent their own storytellers to build narratives to counter it. None of it worked. The people in occupied territories had lived under imperial administration for decades. They knew what the empire's storytelling smelled like. They began to help. Farmers who had fed Kosara districts for 20 years started leaving grain where Gosu's people could find it and supply wagons could not. Road keepers who maintained imperial roads began misdirecting Kosara columns into wrong directions. Merchants who served the empire began carrying information in both directions, selling intelligence to Gosu's people in exchange for the protection they knew the empire could no longer guarantee. By the end of the 18th month, Gosu controlled the southern third of Kosara territory and was moving north. Gosu's alliance was not a single thing. it was a gathering of hatred bound by shared opposition to a common enemy. When that enemy began to retreat, the grievances did not disappear. They became visible. The man who betrayed him was named Bakoroba. He had been a provincial lord under the king of Nduba, one of the 14 kingdoms the Kosara had consumed. He was educated, tactically gifted, exceptional with logistics, and he had joined Gosu's alliance in the 8th month with 140 disciplined fighters, the best military unit Gosu had encountered outside Kosara ranks. Bakoroba earned trust through consistent action, never taking more than his share, always executing what he promised. What Gosu could not have known without an intelligence network he had not yet built at that depth was that Bakoroba did not want to destroy the Kosara Empire. He wanted to replace it. Specifically, he wanted to rebuild Nduba with himself on its recovered throne, and he had calculated correctly that the most efficient path to that goal was to deliver Gosu to the Kosara in exchange for a negotiated restoration. The negotiation took place over 3 months, while Bakoroba sat at Gosu's right hand. On the night the alliance camped 2 days south of the Kosara capital, Bakoroba's forces sealed the camp's northern exits, killed 6 sentries at the eastern perimeter in silence, and sent a signal fire north to Koruma's army, which had been waiting in position for exactly this moment. Gosu was asleep when the attack began. He was not asleep when the first soldiers entered his tent. He had been a poor sleeper since he was 16. The habit had saved his life once and was doing it again. He heard the soldiers die, not the sound of fighting, but the particular silence that replaced it, the wrong absence of men who should have been moving and speaking and were not. He was on his feet before the tent flap opened. 200 Kosara soldiers poured into the camp's center. Gosu moved through them in the dark. Iron weapons shattered against him. He broke the weapons and the men holding them with the systematic efficiency of a man who has spent 4 years in fighting pits, studying every possible way a human body could be brought to the ground. But he was one man. His people died around him. Fatuke was killed by an arrow before anyone knew which direction the attack was coming from. The 4 Nduba fighters who had been with Gosu since the first week of the alliance were cut down, defending a perimeter that Bakoroba had already given away. Gosu could not be killed. He could be surrounded. He could be contained. He could be forced to watch people die while physically incapable of being in more than one place. By the time the sun rose, he was the only uninjured man in a camp of the dead and captured. Gosu was brought into Tumani in chains that were ceremonial. The Kosara smiths had learned enough about his gift to know that iron could not hold him by physical force, but chains communicated something to the watching city, a capture and control that the empire badly needed after 18 months of retreat and humiliation. Emperor Jibaso III received him in the throne room with every member of the imperial court present. The empire needed a visible ending to the story that had embarrassed it. They needed Gosu humbled before witnesses. Jibaso studied him from the throne. The emperor was not what Gosu had expected. He was not the physical force his grandfather's portrait suggested. He was thin, finely dressed, and in his eyes was something Gosu had not anticipated. Fear, not of the man standing before him, something older, something that had been living in the emperor long before Gosu existed. Jibaso spoke. The emperor declared that Mbada had not been destroyed by accident or ambition or imperial expansion. It had been destroyed because of Gosu, specifically because of what he was and what he would become. He laid it out flatly, like a man who had carried a secret so long. 40 years earlier, when Jibaso's grandfather was still emperor, a diviner of accuracy, delivered a vision to the imperial court. The vision was specific, that the last son of the Mbada weapons master's line would carry a gift that made him proof against imperial iron, and he would bring the Kosara dynasty to its end within his own lifetime. The grandfather acted immediately. He sent an assassin to Mbada to find and kill the weapons master's youngest son, who was at that point unborn. The assassin failed. He sent 3 more over the years that followed, as the weapons master's wife bore children and the youngest son remained unidentifiable among brothers. 2 of those assassins killed the wrong boys. The grandfather died before the problem was solved. Jibaso's father inherited the throne and the fear. He tried negotiation, offering Mbada favorable trade terms, building dependency, attempting to make the weapons master's family stakeholders in Kosara prosperity. It accomplished nothing because the diviner had been specific. The gift manifested regardless of circumstance. Prosperity did not alter what a man was born to carry. Jibaso himself inherited both the throne and the problem on the same day. He ordered Mbada destroyed not because it posed a military threat, it did not, but because the diviner had specified one condition. The gift would only reach its full power if the son survived to adulthood, and survival to adulthood required a community, a family, a ground to stand on. Remove the ground, remove the community, kill the boy in the chaos of war without needing to identify him first. The plan was without flaw. 17,000 people died to kill one boy who could not be killed anyway because the gift had been active since his birth. The weapons that shattered against him that night in Mbada were the first proof the gift existed, and no one alive to witness it survived to report it. Gosu had walked out of Mbada's burning because nothing the Kosara soldiers carried that night could take his life. He had survived the pits for the same reason. He had survived the campaign, the betrayal, the chains, and this moment in this throne room for the same reason. The emperor had spent 40 years and 17,000 lives trying to prevent the inevitable, and here it was, inevitable, standing in chains that didn't work, in a throne room that no longer meant what it used to mean. Jibaso stood from his throne, not in challenge, but in admission. He was 60 years old, and the fear that had organized his entire reign was standing in front of him, and he was tired. He had always been tired. He had never wanted an empire. He had inherited one, and a prophecy that made it impossible to enjoy. He asked Gosu one question: what came after? Gosu had not been thinking about what came after. He had been thinking about Fatuke, dead by an arrow before the sun rose, about the 4 Nduba fighters whose names he had spoken every morning for 18 months, about 31 survivors in a camp 2 days south who were alive because he had walked north in chains, about his father who died in a courtyard in Mbada holding a weapon he should not have had to use. He thought about all of this in the silence after the emperor's question. Then he answered. He said the empire would stop, the expansion would end, the district system would be dissolved, every occupied territory would be released to govern itself. The treasury, built on 40 years of extraction, would be divided among the kingdoms that had been extracted from, proportional to what had been taken. Jibaso could live out his remaining years in Tumani as a private man because Gosu did not need his death. The emperor agreed to all of it. The chains came off. The court watched in silence. Not one guard moved. Not one imperial soldier made a decision to test whether iron might work differently today. They knew the stories. They had known them for 18 months. Bakoroba was found 3 days later in the merchant quarter of Tumani, exactly where a man who calculated everything would shelter, somewhere logical, somewhere with good exits. Gosu went alone. What happened inside that house was not witnessed. What was witnessed was Gosu walking out of it alone. The dissolution of the Kosara Empire took 6 years. It was not clean. Nothing of that scale is ever clean. There were regional lords, who refused to relinquish power. They were occupied territories that had been colonized so long. The original governance structures no longer existed anywhere except in the memories of very old people. They were power vacuums that filled with men worse than the Kosara, briefly before being addressed. There were disputes between formerly occupied kingdoms who had harbored grievances against each other long before the empire arrived. Grievances the empire had carefully cultivated because fragmented enemies were easier to manage. Gosu spent 6 years walking into every room where a resolution needed to happen and letting his presence answer the question of whether violence was a viable option. It was not a pleasant 6 years. He did not enjoy any of it. He was not, it turned out, built for peace. He was built for the movement of crisis, for the particular clarity of a problem that could be solved by moving forward and refusing to stop. Peace required a different kind of person. He was honest enough about this to find those people and let them work, while he handled what they could not. He never built a kingdom. He was offered kingdoms, territories, thrones. He refused them all. He had watched his father die defending a throne and had decided, somewhere in the years that followed, that thrones were problems in search of men to attach themselves to. In the 7th year after Tumani, Gosu walked south. He was not fleeing or running. He was walking as a man walks when he has finished something and does not yet know what comes next. He walked south through the territories that had once been the Kosara Empire and were now 14 distinct places, learning to remember who they had been before the empire told them who they were. He walked until he reached a dry stream bed in the bush country, a featureless place that maps did not name, and he stopped. Whether he continued from that point, whether he died there, whether the gift that had carried him through 20 years of impossible circumstances finally released him into something quieter, the storytellers do not say. From that day onward, they say only that he was there, that he had been, that the evidence of him was written in the empty spaces where empires used to stand.